Something strange is happening with Landman Season 3, and honestly, I don't think most fans realize just how fast things are moving behind the scenes. Usually, after a season ends, we have to wait months before hearing anything meaningful about production. But this time, the updates are coming much earlier than expected, and the way the cast and crew are talking about the future of the show makes it feel like Paramount already knows they have another massive hit on their hands. What's even more interesting is that Season 3 might completely change the direction of Tommy Norris' story. Because after everything that happened last season, it no longer feels like Tommy is just trying to survive the oil business. It feels like he's preparing for war. The ending of Season 2 quietly changed everything, and I think a lot of people are still underestimating just how important those final moments really were. Tommy spent most of the series operating like a man trapped between loyalty, power, and pure chaos. Every problem that came his way forced him deeper into a world where nobody could truly be trusted. But by the end of the season, something shifted. For the first time, Tommy stopped reacting to problems and started thinking ahead. That's a dangerous thing, especially for the people standing against him. You could see it in the way he handled conversations, the way he stopped showing panic, and the way he started cutting emotional ties that once controlled his decisions. This version of Tommy feels colder, more calculated, and honestly, much more unpredictable. And if Season 3 really continues in that direction, then we're probably about to see the darkest version of this character yet. The scary part is that Tommy doesn't even seem afraid anymore. Earlier in the series, there were moments where pressure clearly got to him. He looked exhausted, overwhelmed, constantly trying to stop everything from collapsing at once. But now, after surviving everything he's been through, it almost feels like chaos has become normal to him. And when a man like Tommy starts getting comfortable inside chaos, that's when things become truly dangerous. At the same time, Season 3 has another major challenge because the world around Tommy is changing fast. The oil business itself is becoming more unstable, more political, and much more violent than before. The power struggles are no longer happening quietly behind office doors. Now it feels personal. Everybody wants control, everybody wants leverage, and one wrong move could destroy entire companies overnight. That's why I think Season 3 won't just focus on business deals anymore. I think we're heading into a season where betrayal becomes the center of everything. Some of the people closest to Tommy could easily turn against him, not because they hate him, but because survival may force them to choose sides. And honestly, that's the kind of storytelling this show does best. Landman works when relationships start falling apart under pressure. You never fully know who's loyal, who's lying, or who's secretly planning their exit before everything explodes. Even the quieter scenes in the show usually feel tense, because there's always this feeling that something bad is right around the corner. What also makes Season 3 so interesting is the possibility that Tommy's family life could completely spiral out of control again. One thing this series keeps showing us is that Tommy can manage billion-dollar problems better than personal ones. Every time he tries to fix things at home, somehow it creates even more damage. And after the emotional fallout from last season, I genuinely don't think peace is going to last very long. In fact, I think the writers are setting up a situation where Tommy will eventually be forced to choose between protecting his empire and protecting the people closest to him. That decision alone could define the entire season. Because deep down, Tommy still wants to believe he can hold both worlds together, but this show keeps proving that every choice comes with consequences. And the more power Tommy gains, the more isolated he becomes. You can already feel that loneliness growing around him. He's becoming the kind of man people fear more than understand. But now let's talk about the release situation, because this is where things get really exciting. Recent production updates strongly suggest that Paramount is moving much faster with Landman Season 3 than fans originally expected. There are already reports that development started quietly earlier than usual, and that honestly makes perfect sense when you look at how successful the series has become. The network clearly sees Landman as one of its biggest modern franchises, especially with Taylor Sheridan still dominating streaming television right now. And if production continues moving at this pace, There's a real possibility that Season 3 could arrive much sooner than the long delays fans were preparing for. That's why so many insiders are now predicting a late 2026 release window instead of pushing the show much further into the future. And honestly, the speed of these updates tells me something important. Paramount probably wants to keep momentum high before audience excitement cools down. Because right now, Landman still feels fresh, explosive, and unpredictable. The fan discussions are getting bigger, the theories are everywhere online, and people are already trying to figure out who survives the next chapter. That kind of attention is hard to ignore. What's really crazy, though, is that Season 3 might end up being bigger in scale than anything we've seen so far. The show started as this grounded look into the brutal reality of the oil industry, but now it feels like the story is expanding into something much larger. The enemies are becoming more powerful, the stakes feel more personal, and Tommy's influence. One thing I keep thinking about when it comes to Landman Season 3 is that Tommy Norris may have already crossed a line he can never come back from. And the scary part is, I don't even think he realizes it yet. Throughout the series, Tommy has always justified his decisions by telling himself he was protecting people, protecting business, or simply doing what needed to be done to survive. But after everything that happened last season, those excuses are starting to disappear. Now it feels like he's making choices because power itself has changed him. You can see it in the way people react around him now. Earlier in the show, Tommy felt like a guy trying to manage impossible situations. But now, he walks into rooms like someone who expects control. That shift may sound small, but for this kind of story, it changes everything. Because once a character starts believing they're untouchable, that's usually when the downfall begins. And honestly, Landman has been quietly building toward that kind of collision for a while. The biggest problem for Tommy moving forward might not even be his enemies anymore. It could be the people standing closest to him. Season 2 created this strange feeling where alliances no longer feel stable. Everybody seems connected by pressure instead of trust. And in a world built on money, oil, and influence, pressure can destroy loyalty very fast. That's why I think Season 3 is going to focus heavily on fractured relationships. Some characters are going to start questioning whether Tommy is still worth following. Others may realize that staying loyal to him could put their own futures at risk. And once doubt starts spreading inside a business empire like this, things fall, not because of violence, but because these characters genuinely know how to hurt each other. There's also a growing feeling that Tommy's success is attracting attention from people far more dangerous than the ones we've already seen. Earlier conflicts felt local, personal, and contained inside the oil fields. But now the scale feels different. Bigger players are watching. Wealthier people. More political people. The kind of individuals who don't solve problems with arguments. They solve them by destroying careers, reputations, and entire companies from the shadows. And if Tommy starts stepping into that level of power, he may finally encounter opponents he cannot intimidate or outmaneuver. That's honestly where the show becomes really interesting to me. Because Tommy is incredibly dangerous when he understands the battlefield. But what happens when the game changes completely? What happens when influence matters more than toughness? For the first time, Tommy could find himself entering a war where brute force and confidence are not enough to survive. At the same time, Season 3 could finally explore the emotional cost of the life Tommy has built. One thing this series constantly hints at is that Tommy is emotionally exhausted even when he pretends to stay in control. The man is carrying years of stress, guilt, and pressure, and eventually something has to break. You can only survive inside chaos for so long before it changes you permanently. And honestly, I think the writers are slowly turning Tommy into a man who no longer knows how to live outside conflict. Peace almost feels uncomfortable to him now. Every time things calm down, another disaster appears immediately after. That pattern has become his normal reality. So if Season 3 ever gives Tommy a real chance to step away from everything, I genuinely don't know if he would even take it. Part of him may already be too deep inside this world to escape. And that's tragic when you think about it, because Tommy once felt human, flawed, and relatable. Now he's becoming something colder, more isolated, more consumed by survival. Another storyline that could become extremely important is the growing tension inside Tommy's personal circle. There are several characters who clearly love him but are also starting to fear what he's becoming. And that creates a dangerous emotional divide. Because eventually people stop asking whether Tommy is right or wrong and start asking whether he's even safe to be around anymore. Those kinds of emotional cracks are usually where Taylor Sheridan's shows become their most intense. The action matters, sure, but the emotional betrayals always hit harder. Watching relationships collapse under pressure is what keeps audiences invested. And Landman understands that perfectly. Nobody in this world gets to stay innocent forever. The business changes everybody eventually. Now when it comes to the release date, the latest production rumors honestly sound much more promising than expected. Multiple insiders believe Paramount wants Landman Season 3 ready faster than originally planned, especially after seeing how strongly audiences responded to Season 2. The streaming numbers reportedly exceeded expectations, and the network clearly understands that Taylor Sheridan projects perform best when momentum stays consistent. That's probably what's also important here is that Sheridan's schedule appears more organized than before. Over the past few years, his projects sometimes faced delays because he was juggling multiple massive series at once. But now there's a sense that Paramount is becoming more strategic about managing his universe. And Landman has quickly turned into one of their biggest priorities. That means faster development, stronger marketing, and probably a much smoother production schedule overall. Right now, late 2026 still feels like the most realistic prediction for Season 3, but honestly, I wouldn't even rule out an earlier surprise release if filming moves efficiently enough. The fact that fans are already getting updates this early is a huge sign by itself. Normally, studios stay quiet when things are uncertain. But when information starts coming out this soon, it usually means confidence behind the scenes is extremely high. And honestly, that confidence makes sense. Landman doesn't. What makes Landman Season 3 feel so exciting right now is that the show is entering a stage where literally nobody feels safe anymore. And honestly, that's usually when a series becomes truly addictive. Earlier seasons still had moments where you could believe certain characters would always survive because the story depended on them. But now, I'm not so sure anymore. The tone of the show is changing. The pressure is getting heavier, the enemies are becoming smarter, and Tommy Norris keeps moving deeper into a world where every decision creates another problem waiting around the corner. It's starting to feel less like a business drama and more like the slow collapse of a man trying to hold too much power together at once. And the frightening part is that Tommy still believes he can control everything. But Season 2 already proved that control inside this world is mostly an illusion. I also think Season 3 could finally push Tommy into direct conflict with people operating at a completely different level than anything we've seen before. Up until now, most threats came from competitors, criminals, or unstable situations inside the oil fields themselves. But now Tommy's influence has grown so much that larger forces are almost guaranteed to notice him. We're talking about powerful investors, political figures, corporate giants, and people with connections capable of destroying lives quietly. Those kinds of enemies don't need guns or public threats. They destroy people financially, legally, and emotionally before their targets even realize what's happening. And honestly, Tommy may struggle more against that kind of power because he's used to solving problems directly. He understands pressure, intimidation, and risk. But Season May 3rd force him into situations where intelligence and patience matter more than aggression. That alone could create some of the most intense moments the show has ever had. At the same time, I think Tommy's personal life is heading toward another disaster. The deeper he sinks into this world, the harder it becomes for him to separate business from family. And this show constantly reminds us that those two worlds cannot coexist peacefully forever. Every time Tommy tries balancing both sides of his life, something breaks. Someone gets hurt. Someone loses trust. And eventually people start reaching their limit emotionally. That's why I wouldn't be surprised if Season 3 gives us a major betrayal from someone Tommy never expected to lose. Not because they suddenly hate him, but because living around him has become exhausting and dangerous. One of the saddest things about Tommy as a character is that he genuinely believes he's protecting people while simultaneously dragging them deeper into chaos. He keeps trying to save everybody, but somehow the destruction keeps spreading anyway. There's also the possibility that Season 3 becomes the darkest emotional chapter of the entire series. Because beneath all the business conflicts and oil politics, Landman has always been about survival. These characters are constantly trying to survive pressure, greed, fear, loneliness, and the consequences of their own decisions. And eventually survival changes people. You can already see it happening to Tommy. The man who once seemed exhausted and overwhelmed now almost looks emotionally numb at times. He's adapting to the chaos instead of fighting against it. And honestly, that transformation might be the most dangerous storyline in the show right now. Because when someone stops fearing the consequences of their own world, they start making choices other people would never dare to make. That's why Season 3 feels unpredictable. Another thing fans should pay attention to is how much bigger the scale of the story appears to be becoming. The oil business in Landman no longer feels like just a setting. It's becoming a battlefield. Every deal, every alliance, and every personal relationship now carries massive consequences. One wrong move could collapse entire careers overnight. And, because of that, even small conversations in the show feel tense now. There's always this uncomfortable feeling that somebody is hiding information or planning something dangerous behind the scenes. That tension is what makes Landman so addictive to watch. The show doesn't need constant action because the atmosphere itself already feels unstable. You're always waiting for the next explosion, whether emotional or literal. Now regarding the release date, all signs honestly point toward Paramount wanting Landman Season 3 out as quickly as possible. The success of the series has reportedly exceeded expectations, especially internationally, and that kind of momentum is incredibly valuable for streaming platforms right now. Studios hate losing audience attention between seasons, especially when a show is generating constant online discussion. That's why the early production movement around Season 3 feels so important. Multiple reports suggest the creative team is already preparing things far ahead of schedule compared to normal television timelines. And honestly, when networks move this fast, it usually means they have a lot of confidence in what's coming next. Late 2026 still seems like the safest prediction at the moment, but the fact that conversations about production are happening this early tells me we probably won't be waiting nearly as long as many fans originally feared. Paramount clearly understands that Landman has become one of the strongest modern drama series in Sheridan's television universe. And with audience interest continuing to grow, there's simply too much momentum to slow things down now. Honestly, Season 3 feels less like a continuation and more like the beginning of a completely new phase for the show. Tommy Norris is changing, the world around him is becoming more dangerous, and the stakes are rising faster than ever before. And that's exactly why I think Landman Season 3 could end up being the biggest season yet. Not just in scale, but emotionally too. Because this time, it feels like the story is building towards something far more destructive than we've seen before. The real question is whether Tommy can survive the monster he's slowly becoming. Do you think Tommy will lose everything in Season 3? Which storyline are you most excited about? Let's discuss it in the comments below. And after that, you can go and watch this video next. You'll love it. But here's the thing that keeps bothering me about Landman Season 3. What if the biggest threat to Tommy Norris isn't outside his company at all? What if the real danger is Tommy himself? Because if you really look back at everything that happened throughout the series, you start noticing a pattern. Every single time Tommy tries gaining more control over his world, things somehow become even more unstable. He fixes one disaster only for two more to appear immediately after. And at first, that chaos felt accidental. It felt like the unavoidable cost of working inside such a brutal industry. But now it almost feels like Tommy is addicted to the pressure itself. Like he doesn't know who he is without conflict surrounding him constantly. That's why I think Season 3 could become the most psychologically intense season of the entire show. We've already seen Tommy survive physical danger, business threats, and emotional breakdowns. But surviving yourself is a completely different battle. The deeper Tommy goes into this world, the more isolated he becomes. People still work with him, people still follow him, but you can feel the emotional distance growing wider every season. Even during conversations with people closest to him, there's this constant tension underneath everything. It's like nobody fully knows which version of Tommy they're dealing with anymore. The protective family man? The ruthless businessman? Or the exhausted survivor slowly losing pieces of himself under all this pressure? Honestly, I don't even think Tommy knows the answer anymore. And that identity crisis could become extremely dangerous because powerful men usually make their worst decisions when they stop feeling emotionally connected to the people around them. Tommy has spent years convincing himself that every sacrifice was necessary. Every lie, every betrayal, every dangerous decision. But Season 3 might finally force him to confront the damage those choices created. Not just financially, but emotionally too. Because eventually people stop forgiving the chaos. Eventually they start protecting themselves instead. And once that happens, Tommy could find himself completely alone for the first time in his life. What's also interesting is how the series keeps showing us that the oil industry itself is changing rapidly. Earlier seasons focused heavily on survival